their view of the world, their solutions to the world, and at the same time try to grapple the questions of many of the problems of people, and especially of the indigenous peoples of the world.
Marcus, I have a question. I think it's great that Obama has stated publicly that he supports this. However, we know that the United States still has not signed off on it. And so why has it taken so many, well, like, for example, it took Canada quite a bit of time to finally show public support for it. I think it was Canada and New Zealand that were holding out, and the United States that were the last few countries that were holding out on it. Now it's just the United States. What is the challenge? Why does the United States not want to, or what is the hesitancy that the United States has on signing off on the declaration? What is your...
It was Canada, it was Australia, and New Zealand.
Okay.
And New Zealand. There's reasons for that. And the United States was last to sign on board.
And still hasn't to this point, right?
And, well, certain people are pleased and other people are not. Mm-hmm. And so the changing from the Bush administration, which didn't want to even put it on the table, mm-hmm. to the Obama administration, which we met with them, mm-hmm. with the State Department, with the Interior Department, with the USAID, with the Obama's office, and with the UN ambassador to the United Nations, and also to the certain UN dignitaries, met them face on, and afterwards you met with the BIA tribal leadership to try to address the question of what Native people, indigenous people think, mm-hmm. And so it's at this point in time, it's light years ahead over the Bush administration, but at the same time, the Obama administration needs to understand that this is something more than just a political discussion. It's about the rights of indigenous peoples, mm-hmm. and about the human rights. Human rights supersedes internationally all rights of states. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we know the history of the United States of America.
Okay, and so how would this information, like, for example, I mentioned earlier that the Barbareno Chumash Council with the Seventh Generation Fund is working to create workshops and familiarize the Native community about DRIP. Why? How is this information relative to the average Native person? How would it affect, I mean, because even the term self-determination is such a huge and almost ambiguous word or phrase. Talk to me a little bit more about that.
The Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People affects about 370 million people worldwide. Mm-hmm. And within the Declaration it has a preamble, and one of the things, it's a wonderful preamble. It's an amazing that they put this together, and about many things that people should always can visit the United Nations Indigenous Forum. They can visit. Hopefully, your website can carry the articles. Mm-hmm. I mean, the articles within the whole document of the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. But one of the things that's so unique is that every indigenous person or individual has a right to a nationality. Mm-hmm. The question of identity. Let me get to the point. Chumash people have been attacked. I call them white chiefs and white anthropologists, and through different institutions, academia, the museums, all of them are telling us who's Chumash, who's not. That day's over with. Those days are long gone. And the Barbareno Chumash Council is declaring to the world that they're going to determine who's Chumash or not. We have good relationship with San Ynez, with the Coastal Band Chumash Nation, with the Northern Chumash Council, and with other individuals within our Chumash Nation. And we're declaring that we are not only talking about our national identity, but we are challenging and we are going to express, with no uncertain terms, our right to be indigenous, our right to be Chumash, our right to be who we are. The methodology has been divisive. Individuals have made a living sucking the culture and the blood and the lives and the bones and everything of our culture. That's to stop. I really appreciate the American Indian movement in Santa Barbara because of the fact they stood up for injustices, against stereotypes, and for our youth within the general area. Well, this is the tip of the iceberg. How do we talk about resources? How do we talk about our identity, our language? How do we talk about our ceremonies? How do we express protection of sacred sites? How do we have access to it? And at the same time, come together in a civil, in a kind, courageous, and understanding manner, in which bring the Chumash nation together so you can address these questions. It's not going to happen overnight, because the policy of the United States government, in my opinion, has been a policy of extermination and of elimination of Native peoples, the first peoples, the original people of the land. Because that's the policy. And through whether it be Dawes allotment, whether it be through the IRA, or whether it be through determination, or whether it be through the recent discussions of the present administration, the premise of that, in the fortunate, we bring up the question of land title, we bring up the question of the papal bull, and we bring up the question of the rights of discovery, the doctrine of discovery. And that is something that we want to bring home. Why do we want to bring it home? Naples, wow. Sinanquitas. We want to, whether it be all the different villages, the burial sites, our ceremonial sacred sites, the islands, the sacred sites within the mainland, all these stories, all these sites, we are coming aboard in order to defend that. And many institutions, all the way through the academia, all the way through the museum, all the way through the government, city and county, all the way through the bureaucracies, have roadblocks after roadblocks and roadblocks. And one of the things, the strategies of those individuals and institutions and methodologies and philosophies, is the fact that they want to pit one Chumash against another. And we are saying we're not falling for that trap.
I have a question. For some people that are not familiar with what the papal bull is, or how Christianity has played a role in the erosion and demise of Native people, Native lands, could you go into a little bit more detail about that? Or just briefly go into that?
I was thinking that how are you going to address this question of this vast document? And when you go to the North American Caucus, when you go to the United Nations, and there's some photos are up, and hopefully they'll show those photos. When I went to the United Nations, I sat, and the first time Indigenous people sat in the hall where other states have their representatives. And because of that, it created a sense of, we are at Oral Lions, when my discussion with him, he says, we were beating the door and they didn't let us in. Now they're inside this building, and we are strong, and people, it wasn't just North American, Indigenous, South America, Central America, Asia, India, Micronesia, in Europe, Indigenous people, the Russian Federation, Africa, and many of the African, and that was a struggle to get African nations in order to at least vote for this Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. But suffice to say that this particular effort in order to deal with the papal bull is a vast discussion. I would recommend people reading Pagans in the Promised Land by Steve Newcomb in order to grapple this question of the jurisprudence of this North American doctrine of discovery, and how it is the basis of not separation of church and state, but the merger of church and state, of the Pope and the United States Constitution, Supreme Court, and how the way they got around to that is they said that the indigenous people were heathens, were not Christians, so therefore they're not having any rights. And so therefore, the doctrine of discovery states that if you were a Christian, you have the right to own land. If you're not, you didn't. And most of the native people were not Christians. Now, through the years, because of the missionaries and because of the atrocities, just downright atrocities, that they forced native people